better than your currency. Splurging millions, buying houses like Monopoly. Fucking 9 to 5, man, the money is a joke to me. Buying cryptocurrency, my money in the privacy. I make it rain dollars, they watch me disappear. I'm so fly, man, I'ma need some land again.
Hey guys and girls, welcome to this week's episode of the No BS with Birchy podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Birch, and this is a show unraveling the truth to the facade of the 21st century. We're now exiting the matrix and waking up to motherfucking reality. Today, I feel a bit shy saying that because I've got a very special guest, and we've got Mario here from Maneco 64. Those of you that follow me on Birch feed would be familiar with Mario because I share a lot of his videos, and a lot of people ask me, Nathan, you know, I want to know, where do you get information from? Who do you get sources from? And, you know, to make your decisions. And, you know, I always say that a lot of the stuff I do is just made out of calculations and theories of thoughts. But there is some very instrumental people out there that that have a lot of knowledge about how the world works and how the economics work. And Mario is on YouTube as Maneco 64 and the home of contrarian views. And yeah, I appreciate all that you put out there. So it's an honour to have you on the show. And yeah, maybe if you can just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing and get in. And I'm so excited to have you today.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. And yeah, I've basically worked in the financial industry for like 25 years, from the late 80s till 2012. In the last 20 years, I worked in the city of London as a futures and options broker. The market that I traded mostly was government bonds and interest rates, which is not something familiar for the general public. They always look at stocks. After 2012, the firm I work for, they closed down my department. I tried to get back into the city. At the time, I was like 48, so it's always tougher. And then I actually tried a pawnbroking franchise, and I opened a shop here in London. It didn't really work out that well, but I was able to get out of it in 2.5 years. And then I had to regroup, and I started making videos on YouTube late 2015. And I try to basically talk to the general public like I used to talk to my clients, and my clients were not private clients. They were like institutional investors from funds, banks. And what I try to do on my channel is to basically explain how the system works, monetary and financial system. And the reason why I think it's really interesting to know how it works is because I started looking into precious metals back in the early 2000s. Exactly was 2002. And when you buy gold and silver, you start looking at the history and you realize that the system is really broken. And that's what I've been trying to warn people for the last 7 years or so on my channel. And yeah, I call myself the home of alternative economics and contrarian views. You have to find the marketing you know, the tool, just like your introduction there.
Yeah. And it's I always love the topics because I think I've been following you since about 2018, 2017, so about 5 or 6 years at your channel. And you know, I just, you know, your views on precious metals, it's really, really awesome. There's a lot of people out there in the space, they talk about their opinions, but when you go on, like, just a bit about my background as well, like I buy, but just in case your viewers are watching this, I buy lots of properties, got a few hundred properties under my belt, and I used to be on the TV a lot, and I used to, you know, host and commentate on TV, and I realised that they never wanted what I had to say. They always wanted what was written on a teleprompter, right? And I'm like, who's trying to write a script to get things out of your mouth? And I realised that all the stuff that comes out in the media is basically a scripted version of what the system wants to share with you. And I knew that if there's a lot of lies when it comes to certain topics like around financial markets, it makes me start questioning, you know, what else is happening out there when it comes to geopolitical, military, health, all those things that, you know, I don't know anything about. It's like there's an agenda here, and you know, finding really knowledgeable people that have experience in, their field is very rare. And that's where I came across your knowledge. I'm like, this adds up 100%. And, I think everyone should be watching you. So thanks for that, Mario.
Thank you.
So I do have a few questions for you today, just to start the ball rolling before we get into some of it. I guess, like, you've been around doing what you do for a long while now. If you had a time machine where you could go back, we've got Marty McFly's DeLorean, and we could go back to the future, what would be, where would you want to go to, and what would you want to do or change that would be different?
Yeah, but the question is like, if I want to go back to the past or go forward, right? Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I thought about that question, but I will answer it because I read something that Aristotle said about that time a few weeks ago, and it's interesting that you asked me that. He said basically there is no time. Things are just, now, when we started this podcast, it's already passed, right? But if anything, I don't know, it's just more family related. I wouldn't want to go back to a historic moment or a leader or something and change things. Just want to see how things were when my great grandfather left Italy in like 1892. Just find it interesting. He left Italy to go to Brazil. That's maybe something I'd like to go back to see how things were and what made him decide to do that. So nothing really special. I think that's why it's good to learn from your parents, even though, when I was growing up, I never wanted to listen to my dad because they've lived life. So that's why reading history is a good thing. So you learn how behavior affects, action, the consequences of people's behavior. And that's what I try to do with the economy and the monetary system. It's not even trying to forecast things. It's just like seeing that when people misbehave, there will be a consequence. You go out drinking and you drink too much the next day. It's not a prediction. You will have a hangover. So that's what I try to do. So yeah, I'd just go back to see what it was like back then.
Yeah, awesome. And I think there can be so much to be learned from just looking at history and looking at, the actions that people have taken. And you're right, like, you have a big night on the drinks and, you're going to be paying for it. And I think everybody's been having a big party on the cheap credit and the cost of the value of our currency. And we're at a point of judgment day where the hangover is going to kick in. Everyone's trying to avoid the hangover from financial markets, but we're very close. And they've manipulated it so many times that there's only a couple of more manipulations left in it. So, yeah. And I guess, like, throughout, if we go back through your life and look at, some of the things, has there been a specific point where something's like jumped out at you and it's like, a moment where you've gone like, hey, that shaped your view to be where you are today with the system?
Yeah, I guess when I was in my 20s and I was starting out, and I was, doing well and earning more money, I realized, these taxes, this is why does the government know best what to do with my money? And that's what has shaped my the way I look at things. Why should a bunch of bureaucrats, take part of my earnings and decide what to do with it? So that was probably the late 90s. And then I also read the book Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, and a couple of years, and it took me about a year to read it because I was a full-time job in the city, and it's I think 1,600 pages. But by then, I started looking at free markets and the fact that we don't really have free markets because we have central banks, and central banks are a monopoly, and the interest rates should be set in a free market. And if the central banks are setting short-term rates, it's not a free market. So yeah, around that time, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, cool. I think I always make the joke, Mario, that we're living in the free world, but we're free-range communists. It's I feel like it's all set for us, it's all planned for us, and it's you speak out and you get attacked by the Agent Smith.
Yeah, you're free until you're free to do what you're told, but if you do something, yeah.
I was actually reading the news today, and here in Australia, like we have like the pension plan, like it's a super fund. So one of the things I realised, I was reading through the budget and their changes, and one thing here in Australia, like we had a massive recession here in 1992, and I look back through history, and everyone blamed the politician here at the time. And growing up, I was under that belief as well. But then I looked at every other country that had the same recession that we had here, and looking at what they did in 1990s, they actually created the pension plan, which is a superannuation where every boss had to pay their staff like a percentage of their wages into this retirement fund. And recently they've upped it from 9% to 10% to 11% now. And I realised that what we're seeing at this point in time is that the liquidity is being drained out of all the markets, all the free markets that we've got out there, and they've got to try and somehow re-inject whatever they can. The government here got into a recession in the 90s, and it was $96 billion worth of state debt, of country debt, federal debt. Now we're at $1 trillion worth of a debt here in Australia, and we're stuck at a 10 basis point interest that they're paying for it. Now the cash rate's gone up to 410 basis points. It's like the largest growth in government spending for this last 12 months has been interest bills for the government. I just laugh because it's like the governments are starting to go broke, but where are they going to get their funding from? So they've just increased 1% higher super funds. And that's where they're getting their government bonds from, is through these super funds. And it's like they've literally forced employers to pay money to their staff superannuation fund, and then in turn they being able to generate bonds and other financial instruments from it. So it's
interesting that you say that, because I was looking at some data from Australia here, and you've got the CPI, which is the measure of prices, and they call inflation around 7%. And then you look at the Aussie government bonds, the 10-year yield is at 4%. Usually it should compensate investors. It should be paying like 9 or 10. So that makes sense that these pension funds, super funds, are being forced to buy bonds to keep rates low. So what the government is doing, they're like writing off their debt to make it easier to carry, and public is paying for it. Not just because they're taking more of their earnings and putting into this fund, but also because of higher prices and a higher cost of living. And you talked about Aussie debt, and it's very interesting. I'm looking at some data here. As recently as 2004, your debt to GDP was only 12%, which is really low. But now, like you said, the debt is at $1.2 trillion, and it's almost 67%. So Australia is actually, compared to the US, they have less debt to GDP, but the growth has been like fivefold in like less than 20 years. So, and they still have a lot of room compared to the US, 120%. So they could, I see, my forecast is that they're going to keep increasing the amount they're going to put in these funds, even though I don't follow too much what goes on there.
Yeah, and I was looking at all the tech behind the back end of the banks, and I predicted many years ago, in about 2016, when they started making everything digital, like digital health and digital records for tax and all that, digital for legal, digital land titles, and I thought that we would see a negative cash rate at the banks, and some countries have a negative cash rate, but we got down to 10 basis points, and in real terms, it's negative, but it wasn't. But I don't think the bank systems were designed and set up to carry a negative interest rate. And I think the most exciting thing, I'm excited for the inflation because I've bought literally tons of precious metals. So they're stored in all different random places. And looking at, when inflation comes, like all my assets, my rents at the moment, hundreds of properties, all those rents are going up, 50%, 60%, 20%, 30% per year. And it's like, if we didn't have inflation, that wouldn't be happening. And my debt becomes irrelevant because I'm paying off today's debt with tomorrow's devalued currency. But I think we're at a point where the central banks and policymakers have the ability to try and divert the next crisis. But whichever way they pull the trigger, right, something's going to blow up. And I think it's like they're going to kill the economy. It's like, do you want to kill the economy with a gun, or do you want to stab the economy and kill it with a knife? It's like either way is heading in that one direction. And I'm excited to see what happens to it. I feel blessed to be alive right now, Mario, because we're here, and it's like you couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, what you said about your portfolio of properties is interesting. I'm not into property investment, but some people might think, well, that's crazy to have hundreds of property. But I think if you've done it for a long time and you don't leverage yourself too much, that's the trick. Because now, for example, here in the UK, mortgage rates have been rising quite a bit, and some people are going to be in trouble. But if you don't borrow as much, like you said, you can keep it going. But there will be a point where maybe people won't be able to rent anymore because their earnings will not go up with the rate of inflation.
I think that's when they bring the new Ponzi scheme in, Mario, where we have the UBI, right? It's like,
oh yeah,
sell some of your, right?
Yeah, but I agree with you. Having tangible assets and real estate is definitely tangible, is a good thing. You just have to make sure that you can you don't over leverage. Yeah.
So there's a thing, like I don't think many people realize, like around the world. So around the world, everyone's about getting cash flow from their properties. Here in Australia, there's always been this like stigma of selling a like people. There's all these spruikers out there with their suit and tie, and they do a presentation and they say to negative gear a property where you get a tax advantage for losing money. And like I've never got my head around that, because if you set up a business to lose money, you'd go bankrupt. And investors literally buy properties here in Australia that are negative cash flow. And I think many years ago, probably about 14 years ago, I started doing TV and stuff like that. And like they called me on the TV and stuff. And everyone was like surprised, because no one had ever actually talked about positive cash flow in Australia. And I think if you can buy an asset, attach debt to the asset, the property gets inflated away with inflation, but the debt gets locked in. But then the positive cash flow services that debt, but that also gets inflated away with inflation, which is sort of just in short what I look at from a strategy. But some people are way too over leveraged. I look at like the stuff that I buy, like here in Australia, like a property for 200 grand is unheard of. Everything's like $1 million, $1.5 million. And the stuff that I buy is positive cash flow, and it's only 200 grand. But the people that have got a house on a normal income, they're paying that mortgage, they can't afford like an interest rate. Let's say $1 million loan that was at 3% has now gone up to 7%. That's 30 grand per year to that family on their income is now 70 grand. So there's 40 grand they've got to find from somewhere. That's going to have trickle down economics to a massive recession we're seeing. But whenever they come to help out those guys, if you've got the small amounts of debt with the assets, like it's there to I feel like I benefit from it. So what does a no BS life mean to you, Mario? Like,
no BS. Yeah. It just means being honest and truthful. Not like. And sometimes I guess people think you're not nice because you say it like it is. That's basically what I try to look at things and try to. Sometimes the truth is like a bright spotlight, and you don't want to look into it. So that's basically what it is for me.
Yeah, I feel like we're from the same thought process in that, because sometimes the painfulness of it is where the opportunity is. Like someone wants to go to a gym, they've got to go and lift some iron or do whatever, and they grow a bit of muscle. It's got to tear to grow, and people's minds, sometimes it's hard for them to grow from that. So, it's cool. So I guess big question for you, Mario, is like, we're in a world where there's shocks in the economy throughout the whole world. I know that we're heading for a currency reset. I know you've talked about it a lot, that we're going for a currency reset. How do you see it playing out, and what are some of the things that you're seeing out there in all your data?
Yeah, I mean, a reset is like a correction or an adjustment. I mean, I've looked at resets like financial, like hard assets to stocks. For example, the last big reset, in my opinion, was in 1980 when the Dow to gold ratio was around 2. No, actually 1. But
Yep.
currency reset, you've had many in the past, and there. Back in 1934, for example, the U.S. they reset the dollar, FDR. The dollar used to be, the 1 ounce of gold used to be $20.67. He confiscated the gold in 1933 and then in 1934 in January he said we're now going to reset the price to $35, so that devalued the dollar. So you could argue that in a floating rate exchange rate world where there's fiat currency that like we've had since 1971, a reset is always happening. And what does that mean? It just they just inflate away the debt. I mean, I've seen that the Aussie dollar in gold terms, the last time you could buy it for under $1,000 was in September 2008, and now we're at that's been a reset. But I guess if you get a kind of reset that's done by the government, you'd have probably need a crisis where they close the markets and then over a weekend they come on Monday, they come on the weekend and say we're going to do this and this. We're going to revalue the price of gold to 5,000 overnight, and then on Monday, you have no way of getting any gold over the weekend. That's how it would be done. Or you could also have a reset where they just collapse the whole system or hyperinflate the system. And you've had these resets in countries like Brazil, where I grew up. We've had in the last 60 years 4 new currencies where they inflated away so much. And then over a weekend, they say, well, we're going to take 3 zeros out of the currency. Sometimes they don't even print new notes. They just put a stamp and says instead of 1,000, it's 1. There's different ways. And even Australia, for example, you had a reset back in 1966 when you went from the pound sterling, 240 pence to the pound, and you went to the dollar. And I even have here Australian shilling from 1910. So there you go. So we went through a reset in the UK in 1971 when they went from the 240 pence to the pound to decimalize. And the Europeans went through a reset when they had their currencies converted into the euro. And who wins in the resets? Well, I think it's the governments, because they always do what's best, what's in their interest. And so the debt, I don't know, you could ask your parents or grandparents what happened in the late 60s. I bet price inflation rose after that. They changed to the dollar. Yeah.
And it's very interesting you say that, Mario, and thanks for sharing the shilling. My team member that organised today's meeting, she goes, "Oh, did you bring a whole pile of gold and silver to show?" I was like, "Oh, I don't have the cool stuff. I've got stuff around, but it's I was going to put a whole pile in to show random things, but something random like this could be very controversial. What I'm about to say, Mario, and it's something I've realised recently, right? So, like, let's say, for instance, we know the shilling and the pound and the pence turned to the dollars and cents. That was an ad back in '66 when they did that. If we lost our 1 and 2 cent pieces, which are made out of copper in the early 90s, I think 1992, because they were worthless to do and whatever. If someone was to hop onto eBay and try and buy a 1 cent piece, it's $1, right? And something I realized recently, and I never knew this, right? I didn't even look at it. And I don't think, like, I've been stacking gold and silver since I started in about year 2000. I was 15 at the time. I couldn't buy a property, so I was, buying coins and all that sort of stuff. And I really doubled down in about 2007. I think it was Mike Maloney that was on a Rob Kiyosaki interview or something, and got my interest. And the thing I realised, I never looked at this, is that our coins here in Australia, like the 5, the 10, the 20, and the 50 cent piece, are made out of copper nickel. So that's 75% copper and 25% nickel. I just thought that was scrap metal. And then I did some research into it, and I realized that, well, this is funny. It humors me, right? It humors me. Around the world, like in the US, there's the nickel, which has got more copper nickel value than the actual coin. We're at a point now of inflation that the commodity prices have risen so high that even the cheapest, scrappiest coins, the metal is worth more. So a 5-cent piece here is worth 5.1 cents, 10.2 cents, and so forth. So I actually realized if we had a currency reset, our coins that we have from just over the till at the bank would disappear, and then be a market for those coins that become collectible coins, right? And the metal there is. So without a premium, the best, like, there's no risk to it because you could spend the money if nothing happens and you've got it stored into that. Someone tries to steal from you, they're going to have to take semi-trailers to take it away, right? But I started collecting it, I started stacking it, and it started only about 6 months ago. And I thought I'll just go in and get like $5,000 of each coin from the bank. And little did I know, right? They didn't have anything, right? And they go, what do you need it for? And I thought, oh, I've got vending machines, right? I just need it for my business, whatever, right? Just give me some. And they said, all we have out the back of the bank, like literally they showed me the vault with what they've got. They go, we've got $150 of 5-cent pieces, $200 of 10 cents. And I'm like, you're a bank and all that you have is like $600 worth of coins, right? And I was like, wow. And then we've got these machines here in Australia where you can change the note into coins, and they only store about $500 in each bank. And I've been going to every single bank and taking it all, right? So there's no money in circulation, but if you take everything that's there, I'm literally, me and a couple of mates are causing a bank run just on the little coins, which have more metal value than what they're worth. So people want to stack money under their pillow. A piece of paper printed by a government with a dead criminal printed on it is worthless, but those coins actually still have a physical value. And my thought is what would, if you have a 5-cent piece and it disappears, could it sell as a collectible for $1, right? It's like a 20x. It's like crypto in the real world.
I don't know the law in Australia, how it applies to melting the coins and selling it for scrap, but you could do that too. In some countries, I don't think you can do that here in the UK.
It's illegal, but it'd be the same as that shilling. Like that shilling that you've got, it's probably worth $5, $6, something like that, worth of silver, but it's only like 20-cent piece or whatever. Yeah.
Well, you could sell it abroad though. In other countries, it's not illegal to do that. So correct. You could do that. Here in the UK, I think since 2011, a lot of the coinage, the 5p, 10p, 20 and 50p, they're not even, I think the lower denominations, they're not copper nickel anymore because they've gone, so they put some kind of aluminum, zinc, and they played it with, to make it look like copper nickel. So if you find any 5 or 10p coins prior to 2010 here in the UK, you should keep as many as possible because they're worth more than 10p. And the same thing happened with silver in the 60s. A lot of countries, and the reason this happens is because they inflate so much and the metals become worth more than the face value. And it's the old Gresham's law, you want to spend the bad money first and you keep the good money. And in this case, it's ironic that copper nickel, which was bad money in terms of like in the 60s, now becomes good money. It's just how far they've inflated everything.
Exactly. And it's amazing because I've been looking and trying to find information on this topic of like who's stacking copper nickel and all that. It's just, there's no market out there. At this point, there's no market, but no one's thinking of it. And if you can only go to the bank and get $200 of copper nickel coins, there already isn't a market. So imagine what happens when that disappears. Like, it's just we're seeing what happened in 66 roll over again. We're seeing what happened in 33 and 71 is happening in front of our eyes. The banks here in Australia, I don't know what you're seeing in the UK, but like every time I go to the banks, because I go literally every day to like 10 banks and do my little run and just keep stacking this stuff, right? And when I go to them, every week I'm seeing a bank close, at least one bank close in an area. And you're seeing them merge up, and you're seeing like two logos on the front of the same bank. And it's really insane, the level of bank closures. You go to the bank and ask for $5,000 because you want to buy whatever you want to buy, or tradie or whatever. And the bank put you through like you're buying Garner's drugs or whatever. And it's a really interesting world we're living in. And yeah, I'm excited to be alive right now, really.
Yeah, it is exciting. At the same time, some people they get scared of it. I don't think you should be scared, especially if you know what's going on. And I think it's getting more crazy because the more they lose control of the money, the sillier and more draconian things they'll do. Like you said, you need to prove that, they ask you, why do you want $5,000? They shouldn't ask you, because it's your money. And the same thing happens here in the UK too. And a lot of times I say, it's none of your business, it's my money. Nowadays, I think if you did that, I haven't done it in a while, they actually, they will threaten to, they'll say, we'll freeze your account, actually, unless you tell us. So yeah, I've had that happen before. I think last year I bought some gold online, and they called and said, oh, we want to know why you buying this. And I said, it's none of your business. Said, well, we're going to have to freeze your account. And I had to tell them, I just said, I just bought gold. And so they're becoming more and more draconian in that sense.
Yeah. And you can only imagine when there's no exit or entry ramps into and out of this system. Like here in Australia, like on my properties, for example, I've had like where the property had overgrown grass, it was vacant. The council sends you a fine for not cutting your grass, right? It was like $70 or something. And then I didn't pay it. And then the next minute, they've cancelled my driver's license. So I'm forced to do it to participate legally in the world. And it's like interesting, scary, but exciting. And you mentioned that like people get scared, but they shouldn't be scared. Like the way I see it is that there's people that are benefiting out of any of these cycles. Like there's when they crash a system or they do that, it's like the reset that they're doing. I see it as an opportunity that the policymakers and those that are truly in control of us, they've literally got an opportunity there to blow up their books. They've committed all this fraud on the monetary system, and they're burning their books, and they're paying out their debt. They've got all this debt, and they just hyperinflate, and it's like they've liquidated the company. And it's like the opportunities are there for the everyday person to go, okay, if that's their next move, how can you play in their game? If it wasn't for the central banks, like over the last 15 years, is that the news headlines, like when it comes to property, if there's a boom in the UK, there's a boom in Australia, there's a boom in New Zealand, there's a boom in the US, the boom in Philippines, right? It's everywhere. And if there's a crash, it's like you just take the heading off and you change the city or the country that you're in. All the markets are tied together there. And if it wasn't for the central banks manipulating our currency, we wouldn't see this growth. We wouldn't see this inflation. And there wouldn't be an opportunity for you to buy, gold at 1,000 and now it's 3,000. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, if in a world where there's no central banks, there would still be ups and downs, but they wouldn't be as pronounced and they wouldn't last as long. But I agree with you. You have to know what's going on to take advantage of the opportunities.
Yeah. If they didn't have the table, we wouldn't have a table to sit at and play their games. So that's where I see the biggest thing is. And you mentioned about you're looking up inflation data beforehand, and I read an article the other day. They say that the CPI is like 7% and it's cooling at 7.1 or whatever. Just as the 1st of July, the electricity prices have gone up to 25% here in Australia. If that ain't inflation, I just think about the fridge at the local shopping centre, the truck that had to drive there, all of our produce, everything that we use on a day-to-day basis, that's going to trickle down from those extra costs. And they don't report that. It's just,
the Office of National Statistics here in the UK they changed the way they calculate CPI from May last year. And I've noticed in the Bank of England inflation calculator, which you can go and check online, and they've got prices since 1290. It's really long calculator, but I always used to look at that, and I always still do. But I noticed that last year, all of a sudden, the CPI has moved down. I did a video a few years ago looking, I think 2020, since the Bank of England got its independence in 1997, the CPI averaged like 2.7, and they're supposed to have a 2% target. But if you go there now and you do 1997 to 2020, that number is magically dropped to 1.9. So yeah, they tinker with it. Their excuse is that they say, oh, we want to improve the methodology, but that's a euphemism for we want to lie about it and pretend there is no price rises.
Yeah, it's crazy. I guess, Barry, like I've got lots more questions about just like, with a reset, right? Like you studied currencies and the history of currencies immensely. What sort of things like should the layman look at, right? Like I don't know what it's like. You've got viewers around the world that watch your show. It's amazing. I want you to get millions of subscribers, right? You should really have everyone should be watching you. But I feel like here in Australia, 5 years ago, I was a cuckoo for talking about inflation and whatever. People are asleep at the wheel when it comes to this sort of stuff. What sort of things in history should people be watching out for that happen that are like a very clear and evident telltale sign that we're about to get wiped out in a reset?
Well, I think the inflation, the debt, also the craziness in society, social as well, politically. And I think we're seeing that in spades. And I think one thing that I think the man on the street or woman on the street needs to realize is that if you keep too much money in the bank, if there is a reset, that money will become become worthless almost. I mean, I have an example from my uncle in Brazil. I think it was in the late 80s. And he's a doctor. He's still alive, but he bought a property to open a new practice, and he completed the purchase. And then the next day they had a reset. So he didn't know, but by chance he was lucky to get rid of that cash. But the guy who sold the house, he was like, what he got was worth a lot less in the new currency. So that, I think that's the most important thing. You need to have real tangible assets and keep as little cash balance in the bank as possible, just to cover your expenses or emergencies.
Yeah, I think people don't understand what the real asset is. Like Lynette Zhang, I know that you're friends with Lynette Zhang, and I always love her principle and philosophy around, the having her food and her water and energy and having that very similar. I try and tell everyone here to their own food supply. Like 2020 showed everyone you can't rely on the system. But yeah, looking at physical assets, like whether it's metals, whether it's property stuff. I was actually had an article sent to me earlier on today in San Francisco. The Westfields. I don't know if you guys in the UK are aware of Westfields. What they are, they're like the largest shopping centre.
Oh yeah, I think there's one in London, in West London. Yeah.
So Westfields have walked away from a $1 billion property in the US, a shopping centre. They just literally walked out of the shopping centre. They threw the keys away, and that's Westfield. And I think about people that go, come and invest into a property fund or a trust, one the REIT. And it's like, that's what's happened to your money. That's your super fund, that's your savings, that's your lifeline. You don't own it. You don't control it. You don't expect it on the other side.
And unfortunately, like you said, in Australia and other countries too, they're forcing the pension funds to invest in bonds. And that's probably the worst place to be right now, even though rates have risen. You think, oh, I can get 5% from this bond, but don't forget, it could go to the yields could go to 6, 7, and when that happens, the value of the bond, your capital, drops massively as well.
Yeah, I think that's where everyone's missing out on. It's looking at it from that. In the event, I've been trying to think of this recently as well. Like we're seeing, the instability in China and Russia and US. All these they talk about political things, but then it's like, without getting too technical, like we don't want to get ourselves into trouble on social media, but Saddam, Gaddafi, they talked about trading. They were taken out. We've got a lot of people in China. They don't have the manpower to take that. But there's all these geopolitical things that are happening out there. Remember the bonds, right? Like China and Russia have all of our bonds that are all their bonds. What if they were to throw a match at the bonds, the US bonds? What do you think would happen to the US dollar instantly, and how would that trigger? Because we're all trading in Aussie dollar, US dollar, whichever currency you're trading in against US dollar. If the US dollar blew up, what would happen to all of the other currencies? And what would be the chance of the US dollar blowing up because Russia and China control so much of their bonds?
Yeah, I mean, Russia, I guess their bonds were frozen, but China has about just under $1 trillion of US bonds. And I think it's like us holding money in the bank. We need to keep it there. That's what China thinks. But if China were to probably start liquidating treasuries very quickly, the US would probably freeze their accounts. But if they did that, the dollar, the currencies and the debt are related in the fiat currency system. If the bond market collapses, the currency collapses. So because there's nothing behind it, you can't really. Since 1971, the dollar is I owe you nothing. The U.S. can't settle any debt. They can only issue more debt to pay old debt. Before 1971, you could extinguish that through gold, but then Nixon closed the gold window temporarily, and that's what would happen. For the other currencies, the same thing would happen. They would all collapse because the dollar is still the major reserve currency, and a lot of currencies, a lot of countries have reserves in dollars to back their currency. So if the dollar went, everything would go, and that's why I always say that all fiat currencies are sinking. The dollar, everything. And maybe that's why a lot of the BRICS countries and a lot of the emerging market countries bought a record amount of gold last year, because they know what's coming. So if their currency collapses, they can always rebuild if they have enough gold. Yeah. Australia, I think, only has about 80 tons, of which they keep it all at the Bank of England, which I think is a mistake. And I think I've spoken to John Adams about that. And,
it's crazy. And but for some people might be watching us and they get scared and think, okay, well, there's so much doom and gloom out there. What sort of things? Where can I protect myself? Where's there a safe haven? There's lots of people speculating on crypto. I love crypto. I think there's lots of potential there. But at the same time, I see that just like any of these other markets, there's lots of manipulation and control there. What would your suggestions or thoughts be around places where people can protect themselves? Gold, silver. What would be your?
I mean, I agree with all those things you said there. But the other thing is more psychological. I think people need to realize it's not the end of the world. If a currency collapses, and don't panic, things will be fine. Look at Brazil, right? And it's still okay, but it's had 4 currency resets. I think that's the most important thing. Don't be scared, don't panic, and keep a clear head, and try to, if you've been fortunate enough to be able to have some savings, keep it mostly in hard assets, I would say. And gold and silver are the way to keep it in liquid hard assets that you can, put to work when these things happen. That would be I think a very good time. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's better to be early than to be one day late.
Yeah, it's very important, very important. And I think about like very important you say that, because a lot of people get fearful of, oh, what if? But I realize, like, before we were born, everything was still here, right? It's just a table that we're sitting at, and players come and players go, and things happen. But at the end of the day, if the whole economy collapsed, let's say the whole financial system collapsed, we'd still have every car that's still out there on the road will be on the road. Every house will be in the street. Every commercial building will be out there. We'll all still be in existence. It's just a redistribution of where's who's holding the contracts and the rights and the ownership of those things. And yeah, I'm really excited. I'm excited from researching hyperinflation and seeing who the winners are, and there's the central controlling hands that are out there. They make sure they benefit from these things. It's mopping the floor, taking out the old and bringing in the new. I'm excited by the hyperinflation. I'm nervous by it because a lot of people that we know and love and care for that haven't prepared themselves will be in a world of pain. I love sharing for people to be able to go and protect themselves and be able to play at the table and take advantage of what's really out there. With a hyperinflation, like, I think 7 years ago, I came out talking about hyperinflation will come in the future, and it was really stupid. People, like, they go, "You're off your head, right?" And now that we're seeing high levels of inflation globally, which we haven't seen on a global basis beforehand, people are like, "Wow, yeah, inflation this, inflation that." But I don't think people have any idea on what's really coming to them in the way of inflation. What would be some of the sort of indicators that you'd see that inflation, like that we're heading from just a high level of inflation to a hyperinflation? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, inflation that we're seeing now is like what they call cost push inflation. Everything's rising, and but a hyperinflation is more of a loss of confidence in the currency. And you see people, they get paid and they want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. So that's a symptom of hyperinflation. We're not there yet, and I think they could still keep this system going for a while. But the problem with it is that they can't really deflate, because if they deflate, everything collapses. So they had to keep going. And one day, people will realize, I think, when the general masses wake up and realize that inflation is a deliberate policy, because most people think, Putin caused inflation, or, greedy business people cause inflation. When people realize that it's a government policy, then you get from it becomes psychological, and people just want to get rid of it, the currency. And when the demand for currency drops through the floor, that's when you get hyperinflation. And it's also associated, because I've read about what happened in France in the 1790s and in Germany in the 1920s. You had a lot of debt, political instability. I mean, you had the French Revolution in the 1790s. In Germany after World War I, the emperor abdicated, and you had like different republics within Germany, and coups, assassinations. So there's all that as well. Society becomes like crazy. I saw the Bank of England the other day said that any person of any gender can become pregnant. That's the Bank of England saying that kind of stuff. So I think we're already seeing the symptoms of that kind of stuff. Yeah, what will trigger the hyperinflation? I don't know, but it's a psychological thing, and it happens really quickly. It only took about 18 months in Germany. They had high inflation before, but the hyperinflation was from like mid 2022 to 1923. But the good thing about hyperinflation is that it wipes everything out, all the debt, and you can start afresh after that.
Yeah. And Mario, good question, and same me having to Google it, so I've never looked at this one. You just triggered me a little goose out in my head. if we were to look back at Germany when the hyperinflation occurred, so how many years, did they have high levels of inflation? Like we're seeing high levels of inflation now. It's not normal. Like here in Australia, it used to cost like 80 cents for a can of Coca-Cola, and now it's gone up to $2, $3. You go to the shop, get a meal, and it's $5 for a can of Coca-Cola. Like, how long do we have the inflation period for before a hyperinflation? Like we look at Venezuela, Hungary, all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. I think in Germany, it started after World War I, started in 1914. The Germans, they paid through deficit financing, I think, instead of taxes. So I think probably in a year or two after the war started, they started having, rising inflation. But it was only until 1922 actually that it took off. So it's about 7-8 years. So here we can argue that we've had the deficit spending since 2008 after the great financial crisis. So they're keeping it going for longer because the whole world is doing it. Back then it was just Germany and some of the like countries like Austria and Hungary, Central European states. So now everyone's in this race to the bottom. So maybe that's why it's taking longer, I think.
It's very, very interesting just to look at it just unfold and be a part of it, to witness it. It's like we can only read these things in the history, and we're here today.
Well, the other thing as well, a lot of people a few years ago were saying that we're going to have deflation. They said QE is deflationary, and to some extent it is, but it's proven wrong. And they said that it was going to be transitory as well. So I still stick to the hyperinflation because, it's inflate or die. Like I think it was Richard Russell. He was a famous newsletter writer in the States. He said that once.
And my thought is, like, in this system that we're on, like you touched on it beforehand about there's no chance they can deflate, because if they deflate, we have an implosion of the economy, basically. My thought is it's the same, is that if we have deflation, everything collapses. It's just a deck of cards. They just have to keep printing themselves through it. If you look at the levels of debt that each nation is taking on, it's starting to become like a hockey stick level of inflation. And my thought is that I've mathematically calculated here, for example, in Australia, the average household, a house on a $1 million mortgage, at a 3% interest rate is 30 grand a year. A house on a $1 million mortgage at 7% interest rate now is 70 grand a year. If the household income is 150 grand, you've got both occupants of the property, hop to the mortgage, you have to both work and all that. That is unsustainable. At some point, that means that if the homeowners lose value of the property, if they default and all that, the bank's assets disappear at that point as well, because the bank's assets really just, it's not the house, it's the mortgage contract they've got. And at some point, like here in Australia, I don't know what it's like around the world, but you have the bank bill swap rates, which, a lot of businesses, they're paying cash rate plus 1% premium. If they're on a 10 basis point, now they're like 150 basis point, whatever their premium is over top. That hasn't just gone from 3 to 7%. That's gone up from 1.5% to 5-6%. It's the businesses are feeling the pain. My thought is next time that when they can't control inflation and they're pushing the interest rates up, when they take their foot off the pedal and change course of monetary policy, I think that's when we'll see the hyperinflation. Personally, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think, how it could play out like that. Is something similar?
Yeah, I agree with you. It looks like the Fed could be ready to stop raising rates. We had the CPI data in the US yesterday dropped 3%. So there is talk now that they will stop. They will raise rates one more time at the end of this month and then stop. And then if there's an accident in the economy, which I think there's a good chance of us seeing, then they'll come again and they'll probably, every time they do the QE, they do a lot more in size. It's like a drug addict or an alcoholic. They have to increase the dosage, and then the effect gets smaller and smaller. So yeah, you could be right. I think I agree with you. It's just difficult to say when, but the Fed and other central banks could print even more money the next time things go south.
Yeah, I still remember very vividly here when Corona came out and there was all the lockdowns and everyone was in chaos. I remember I did a whiteboard session. I got some whiteboards inside the room here, and I did a whiteboard session talking about my thought on inflation. The hyperinflationary period wouldn't start for about 4 years, which is probably a little bit in the future, because when they started injecting that liquidity, I was like, this is QE4 coming through, and it's like there's only so much that they can put in before it just has no effect.
Yeah.
So I guess, I'm mindful of your time, Mario. I really appreciate you coming on today. I've just got a couple of final questions for the community and maybe some of your viewers as well. If you had the power to change one thing in the world that we live in today, would that be to try and, what would that be?
Abolish central banks.
Abolish central banks, okay.
And also legal tender laws.
Okay.
Because with legal tender laws, you're forced to pay with a certain currency, and it's it's government currency. So if you didn't have central banks or legal tender laws, I think the world would be a better place. I mean, it won't be perfect. I don't believe in utopia, but it would be a lot better, I think.
And when you go back and look through history, anytime this has happened, it's never been pretty. So. And I guess if you could leave, all of our viewers, one tip of advice, what would that be, Mario?
Advice, yeah. Don't be, like we said earlier, don't be scared, because if everything collapses, the infrastructure is still out there, the people are still out there, the farms are there, and you can just start again, afresh.
Yeah, redistribution, I guess. It's just.
Yeah, you just have to, even people, a lot of people will actually not lose anything because they don't have anything right now. But so it's a chance to actually, I think the Chinese crisis and opportunity is the same word. So think of, so there you go.
Thank you, Mario. Well, I'm really grateful. I feel blessed to have you on the show today. So thank you so much. And I want everyone to head over to Maneco 64. What you put out there is amazing. So just keep doing the content. Really, really appreciate it. Where could everyone find you? How could we send everyone to you? Where's the best channels and socials? Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you, Nathan, for having me on your show. And Maneco 64 on YouTube. That's the best place to go for my content. And I make a video, every day. Yeah.
You do, mate. I think I watch about 80% of them. So it's
Good.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Mario. And thanks a lot for everyone for watching today. Hopefully, you've gained a lot of knowledge from Mario. And if you like the video and the podcast, make sure to smash us a like. Remember, you can view us on Google Play, Apple Play, Spotify, and YouTube out every Thursday. So thanks a lot for tuning in and watching us today. Have a great day.
Like Bilal said, man, we're stuck in the matrix. This my advice, don't care if you take it. The dollar about to die, soon to be hyperinflated. This my 2 cents, don't care if you save it. Join be decentralized and you will see you've been lied to the whole time, and it's the irony, cause they do the exact opposite. You become a slave to the system, enough your money, all they do is profit. There's no conspiracy theory, you better hear me. Crypto will set you free before the system does. I don't care if you do or you don't, but what I'm saying is the truth to the reason you choke. I've never been a failure, excuse my behavior. Keep talking, haters doing me a favor. They all telling lies, I know what they been telling you. I'm the opposite of Donald Trump of Australia. It's amazing, here for the taking. My time is never wasted, just getting wasted. These girls say I'm really breathtaking. Can't help it if I really misbehaving.